The courtroom camera captured the exact moment when confident arrogance transformed into pure panic. Linda Patterson, a 42-year-old woman who had perfected the art of scamming elderly neighbors, sat in the plaintiff's chair with a self-satisfied smile plastered across her face. She had no idea that Judge Judy Shinland would ask her one simple question that would expose years of calculated fraud and send her entire fabricated story crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. What happened next became the fastest courtroom destruction ever captured on television, a masterclass in how decades of legal experience can dismantle even the most carefully constructed lies with surgical precision. Linda had walked into that courtroom believing she had executed the perfect scam. She carried a leather portfolio stuffed with 47 color photographs, meticulously organized repair receipts, printed text message conversations, and even a handwritten timeline of events that she had rehearsed until she could recite it in her sleep. This wasn't her first rodeo in small claims court. Over the past 5 years, she had successfully sued 4 different neighbors for various property disputes, each time walking away with settlement money from elderly people who were too intimidated by the legal system to fight back. She had refined her strategy to an art form, targeting seniors who lived alone, fabricating property damage claims that were just expensive enough to be worth settling but not so large that they would trigger serious investigations. Today was supposed to be payday number 5, a simple $5,000 claim against her 78-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Helen Chen, for fence damage that Linda claimed was caused by Mrs. Chen's supposedly dangerous tree during a violent storm. But Linda Patterson had made one critical, fatal mistake. She had chosen to bring her carefully crafted scam into Judge Judy's courtroom, and Judge Judy had been destroying liars, frauds, and con artists since before Linda was born. Within the first 30 seconds of reviewing the case file that morning, Judge Judy's highly trained instincts detected something that didn't smell right. The evidence was too perfect, too organized, too rehearsed. Real property disputes are messy, emotional, and full of gaps in documentation. Linda's case file looked like it had been prepared by a law firm, not a supposedly distressed homeowner who had just experienced storm damage. Judge Judy had seen this pattern before. Predators who target vulnerable elderly people with fraudulent claims, hoping that the cost of fighting would exceed the cost of settling. She had spent the previous evening doing something Linda never anticipated: actual research into Linda's litigation history, weather records for the area, and property records that would prove to be Linda's ultimate undoing. Mrs. Helen Chen sat trembling in the defendant's chair, looking every bit the vulnerable elderly woman that Linda had calculated she would be. Helen's hands shook slightly as she clutched a simple manila folder containing just a few documents. Unlike Linda's theatrical presentation, Helen's evidence was sparse, almost pathetically so. She had no fancy photographs, no printed text messages, no timeline of events. She simply had her word, her confusion about why her neighbor of 15 years had suddenly turned hostile, and a deep fear that she might lose her home if she was forced to pay $5,000 she didn't have. Helen had immigrated to America 40 years ago, worked as a seamstress her entire life, and had finally paid off her modest home just 3 years before this nightmare began. She didn't understand legal procedures, didn't know how to prepare evidence, and was terrified of the entire court system. Linda had chosen her victim perfectly, or so she thought. The audience in Judge Judy's courtroom that day had no idea they were about to witness legal history in the making. They settled into their seats, expecting the usual back-and-forth drama that made the show so addictively watchable. Some were regulars who attended tapings whenever they could, retired folks who had watched Judge Judy demolish entitled people for decades. Others were tourists who had scored free tickets and were just hoping for some entertainment during their vacation. Nobody in that room, except perhaps Judge Judy herself, understood that they were about to see a masterclass in investigative justice, a demonstration of how one perfectly timed question could unravel years of carefully constructed deception. Before we dive into the moment that destroyed Linda Patterson's entire scheme, before we reveal the one question that Judge Judy asked that made the serial scammer's face drain of all color and her voice crack with genuine fear for the first time in years, you need to understand something crucial. What you're about to witness isn't just another courtroom case. This is the moment when preparation met deception and destroyed it completely. It's proof that no matter how carefully you plan your lies, Experience and truth will always win. Linda Patterson approached the plaintiff's podium with the confidence of someone who had performed this exact routine multiple times before. Her appearance had been carefully calculated to project respectability and victimhood simultaneously. She wore a modest navy blue dress with a simple pearl necklace. Her hair was styled in a conservative manner that suggested suburban soccer mom rather than serial scammer. Her makeup was perfect but understated, designed to make her look trustworthy and sympathetic. She had practiced this look in the mirror for hours, understanding that in small claims court, perception was often more important than reality. As she began her testimony, her voice carried just the right mixture of indignation and wounded innocence that had worked so effectively in her previous cases. "Your Honor," Linda began, her voice steady and rehearsed, "I'm here today because my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, has been incredibly negligent with a dangerous tree on her property, and it has caused significant damage to our shared fence. On June 15th of this year, during a terrible storm, her massive oak tree dropped a large branch that completely destroyed a 30-foot section of the fence between our properties." She paused for effect, shaking her head with practiced disappointment before continuing. "I had warned her multiple times, Your Honor. Multiple times about that tree. I told her it was dying, that the branches were becoming unstable, that it was only a matter of time before something catastrophic happened. But she refused to listen, and now I'm left with thousands of dollars in damage that I shouldn't have to pay for because of her negligence." Linda then opened her leather portfolio with theatrical precision, pulling out photograph after photograph and spreading them across the podium like a dealer spreading cards. "Look at this damage, Your Honor," she continued, her finger pointing at various images. "This is what her negligence has caused. I have 47 photographs here documenting the destruction from every possible angle. You can see the broken fence panels, the massive branch that fell, the damage to my property. I also have repair estimates from 3 different contractors, all of them confirming that this will cost approximately $5,000 to fix properly." She produced the receipts with a flourish, each one conveniently highlighted and tabbed for easy reference. The level of organization was impressive, almost professional in its thoroughness, but Linda wasn't finished with her performance. She pulled out printed text messages claiming they were her attempts to warn Mrs. Chen about the dangerous tree. "Your Honor, I have documentation here showing that I texted her on April 3rd, April 17th, and May the 2nd, warning her about the tree's condition. She acknowledged receiving these messages but did nothing at all. I even offered to split the cost of having the tree professionally assessed, but she refused that too." Linda's voice took on an edge of righteous anger as she continued. "I've been patient, Your Honor. I've been more than reasonable. But after the storm on June 15th destroyed my fence, I realized I couldn't wait anymore. My property has been damaged. My sense of security has been violated. And I need this court to hold her accountable for her negligence." Judge Judy had been listening to the entire testimony with an expression that regular viewers would recognize as dangerously calm. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her face, her eyes never leaving Linda's face even as Linda gestured toward her evidence. Judge Judy had heard thousands of testimonies over her 35-year career and had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect deception within the first minute of someone speaking. Linda's story had every single red flag that screamed fabrication. The testimony was too smooth, too rehearsed, too perfect. Real victims stumble over their words, get emotional at unexpected moments, forget dates and details. Linda's presentation felt like watching an actress perform a monologue she had memorized, not a genuinely distressed homeowner recounting a traumatic property damage incident. When Linda finally finished her opening statement, Judge Judy turned her attention to Mrs. Helen Chen with a much gentler tone. "Mrs. Chen, tell me your side of this situation." Helen's response was a stark contrast to Linda's polished performance. She spoke softly, with a slight accent, her words hesitant and confused rather than confident and aggressive. "Your Honor, I don't understand what she's talking about with a storm. I don't remember any storm on June 15th. My tree, it's very healthy. I have it inspected every year by the tree service because I'm careful about these things. They trim it, they check it, they tell me it's fine." Helen pulled out a single piece of paper from her manila folder, her hands shaking slightly as she did so. "This is my receipt from April when they came to inspect and trim the tree. They said it was in excellent condition." Linda rolled her eyes dramatically, a calculated gesture designed to make Helen look like a confused elderly woman who couldn't remember basic facts. Judge Judy caught that eye roll and her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Helen continued, her voice growing even softer. The fence, it has some damage, yes, but that damage has been there for many years. Little pieces break off over time because it's old. I've been saving money to replace it, but I'm on a fixed income and fence replacement is very expensive. I never had any texts from her about the tree. She pointed at Linda with a trembling finger. She only started talking to me about the fence 2 months ago, saying I needed to pay her $5,000 or she would sue me. I told her I don't have $5,000 and that I didn't damage anything, and then she said she would take me to court. The courtroom atmosphere shifted noticeably. The audience members exchanged glances, their expressions suggesting they were beginning to suspect something wasn't quite right with Linda's story. Judge Judy was taking notes, lots of notes, her pen moving across the paper with deliberate strokes. She looked up at Linda with an expression that made Linda's confident smile falter for just a fraction of a second. "Ms. Patterson," Judge Judy said, her tone deceptively casual, "I have some questions for you. But first, let me make sure I understand your timeline correctly." The room went completely silent, and everyone present could sense that something significant was about to happen. Linda straightened her shoulders, thinking she was prepared for whatever Judge Judy might ask, completely unaware that her entire fabricated story was about to collapse. Judge Judy closed Linda's evidence folder with deliberate slowness, the sound of the leather cover meeting the podium echoing through the silent courtroom like a warning shot. She leaned back in her chair, that iconic posture every regular viewer knew meant someone was about to have their entire world turned upside down. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Linda Patterson's face with the intensity of a predator, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Linda, interpreting this pause as Judge Judy's need to process all her impressive evidence, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had done this before. She knew how these cases worked. Judges looked at the evidence, saw that one side had documentation while the other had nothing, and ruled in favor of the prepared party. In her mind, she had already won this case. She was mentally calculating how she would spend the $5,000, perhaps a vacation or some new furniture. She had no idea that Judge Judy had spent the entire testimony cataloging every inconsistency, every too-perfect detail, every practiced gesture that screamed deception. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was actually only about 15 seconds. The audience members sat frozen in their seats, sensing that something monumental was building. The camera operators adjusted their positions slightly, instinctively understanding that whatever was about to happen needed to be captured perfectly. Mrs. Chen sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking small and vulnerable, hoping against hope that somehow the truth would prevail, despite her lack of fancy evidence and polished presentation. Judge Judy's bailiff, who had worked with her for years and had seen her dismantle countless liars, shifted his weight slightly, recognizing the telltale signs that Judge Judy was about to deploy one of her legendary tactical strikes. This was the calm before the storm, the moment of stillness before the thunder. Judge Judy was about to ask one question, just one single question that would cause Linda Patterson's entire elaborate scam to unravel in real time. "Ms. Patterson," Judge Judy said, her tone deceptively casual, "I have some questions for you. But first, let me make sure I understand your timeline correctly." The room went completely silent. Everyone could sense that something significant was about to happen. Linda straightened her shoulders, thinking she was prepared for whatever Judge Judy might ask, completely unaware that her entire fabricated story was about to collapse. Judge Judy closed Linda's evidence folder with deliberate slowness, the sound of the leather cover meeting the podium echoing through the silent courtroom like a warning shot. She leaned back in her chair, that iconic posture every regular viewer recognized as the moment before someone's world turned upside down. Her eyes narrowed as she studied Linda Patterson's face with the intensity of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Linda mistook the pause for contemplation and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had done this before. She knew how these cases worked. Judges looked at the evidence, saw that one side had documentation while the other didn't, and ruled in favor of the prepared party. In her mind, she had already won. She was already imagining how to spend the $5,000, maybe a vacation, maybe new furniture. She had no idea Judge Judy had spent the entire testimony cataloging every inconsistency, every overly polished detail, every rehearsed gesture that screamed deception. The silence stretched for what felt like forever but lasted only about 15 seconds. The audience sat frozen, sensing something monumental was coming. The camera operators subtly adjusted their positions, instinctively preparing to capture the moment. Mrs. Chen sat with her hands folded in her lap, small and vulnerable, silently praying that the truth would somehow prevail despite her lack of polished presentation. Judge Judy's bailiff shifted his weight slightly. He had seen this before. He knew the signs. The calm before the storm. Then it began. Judge Judy broke the silence, her voice sharp and controlled. "Ms. Patterson," she said, "I have just one question for you before we proceed." Linda's posture straightened even more. She had prepared for this moment, dozens of potential questions, each one rehearsed. She smiled confidently. "Your Honor, I'm happy to answer any questions you have," she said, her voice dripping with false humility. The trap was set. Judge Judy leaned forward, eyes locked on Linda's face. "Ms. Patterson," she said slowly, "what was the exact date that this storm damaged your fence?" The question hung in the air. It sounded simple, even trivial, but the tone suggested otherwise. Linda didn't notice. She answered quickly, confident and composed. "June 15th, Your Honor. I remember it clearly because it was my daughter's birthday. We had planned a party in the backyard, but the storm was so bad we had to move everything inside. It was quite traumatic, actually, watching that branch fall." She even added a small, sorrowful smile for effect. Judge Judy nodded slowly, as if satisfied. Linda relaxed. She thought she had passed the test. Then, Judge Judy reached beneath her desk and pulled out a document Linda hadn't seen before. The movement was smooth and deliberate, like a magician revealing the final card of a trick. She held up the papers so the camera could capture them, the official letterhead gleaming at the top. "Ms. Patterson," Judge Judy said, her voice now carrying an edge sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. Linda's confident expression began to crack. "I have here the official weather records from the National Weather Service for this area covering the entire month of June." Linda's smile froze on her face, twisting into something closer to a grimace. A bead of sweat formed on her forehead, glistening under the courtroom lights. Judge Judy's voice grew firmer with every word. "And according to these official government records, there was no storm in your area on June 15th. The courtroom erupted with quiet gasps and murmurs. Linda's face drained of color, the pink confidence giving way to a pale, sickly shade of panic. Judge Judy wasn't finished. "In fact, Ms. Patterson," she continued, "there wasn't a significant storm anywhere in this region for 3 weeks before June 15th, or 2 weeks after. The only notable weather event during that entire time was on July 8th, and that wasn't a storm at all. It was a heat wave with temperatures reaching 98 degrees, she paused, letting the silence stretch and the weight of her words settle. "So," Judge Judy said finally, her eyes locked on Linda's paling face, "let me ask you again, what storm are you talking about?" Linda's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her composure disintegrating. The story she had so carefully crafted, every false detail, every fake flourish, was collapsing under the weight of official documentation she hadn't dreamed the judge would produce. Her hands trembled, loosening their grip on the leather portfolio she'd clutched so confidently before. "Well, maybe I have the date wrong," she stammered, her voice shaky now. "Maybe it was a different day. The weather was bad, I know that for certain." The audience could see it unfolding in real time, the scammers unraveling, the desperate attempt to salvage a lie that was already dead. But Judge Judy was only getting started. Her calm expression hardened into something colder, controlled fury. The weather records remained raised in her hand like a piece of damning evidence in a murder trial, irrefutable proof that Linda Patterson's entire case was built on deception. "Ms. Patterson," Judge Judy said, her voice cutting clean through Linda's excuses, "you don't just forget the date of a storm that supposedly caused $5,000 worth of damage to your property. And you certainly don't confuse it with your daughter's birthday party. 2 of these companies have never heard of you, Ms. Patterson," Judge Judy said, her tone icy and deliberate. "They have no record of ever doing work at your address. The 3rd company, Harrison Fencing, did come to your property, but only to provide an estimate. You never hired them for any actual repairs." She held up the papers between two fingers as if they were something foul. So these receipts you presented to this court are fabricated. They're fake. You created false documents and brought them into my courtroom as evidence. Do you understand the severity of what you've done? Linda opened her mouth, but no real words came out, just a broken, strangled sound. Judge Judy didn't wait for an answer. But here's what makes your fraud truly despicable. Ms. Patterson. Her voice hardened, the calm gone, replaced by a tone that sliced through every pretense of innocence. I did some research into your litigation history. In the past 5 years, you've filed small claim suits against 4 different neighbors. And not just any neighbors, 4 elderly neighbors. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Every single case followed the same pattern. Judge Judy continued, each word landing like a hammer. Property damage claims between $3,000 and $6,000. Always against senior citizens living alone. Always settled out of court because your victims couldn't afford lawyers, or were too intimidated by the legal system to fight back. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Linda. You're not a victim, Ms. Patterson, you're a predator. You target vulnerable elderly people, fabricate property damage, create false evidence, and then bully them into paying you hush money to avoid court. The audience's murmurs turned into open disgust. A woman in the 3rd row shook her head and said loudly enough for the microphones to catch, "That's despicable." Linda's composure shattered completely. Tears streamed down her face, not the practiced performative tears she'd used earlier, but real, panicked ones. She finally understood that the situation was beyond saving. "Your Honor, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I can explain. This is all a misunderstanding." "You don't understand the full situation." Judge Judy silenced her with a raised hand. "Oh, I understand perfectly, Ms. Patterson," she said coldly. "You thought you could walk into my courtroom with your fake evidence, your rehearsed performance, and scam another elderly person out of money they don't have. What you didn't understand is that I've been doing this for 35 years. I've seen every scam, every con artist, every variety of fraud imaginable. You're not original, Ms. Patterson. You're just another predator who finally got caught." Linda tried one last desperate plea. "But the fence really is damaged, Your Honor. That part is true. Mrs. Chen's property is connected to mine, and there is damage that needs to be repaired." Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "Yes, Ms. Patterson, there is damage to an old fence that's deteriorated over years of normal wear and tear. But you tried to turn that natural aging into a fake storm damage claim so you could extort $5,000 from a 78-year-old woman living on a fixed income. And let's be absolutely clear about your endgame here," Judge Judy said, her voice slicing through the courtroom like a blade. "You weren't planning to use that money to fix any fence, were you? Your pattern with previous victims shows that you take settlement money and never make a single repair. You're nothing more than a con artist who's found a profitable niche, targeting senior citizens who are too frightened or too poor to fight back." The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted completely. What began as a simple property dispute had now been exposed as something far darker, a calculated fraud carried out by a serial scammer who had finally met her match. Judge Judy's final ruling came down like a thunderclap. "The case is dismissed," she declared, her voice ringing with authority that left no room for appeal. "Ms. Patterson, you will receive nothing, not 1 penny, not 1 cent. Your fabricated storm, your falsified evidence, and your pattern of exploiting the elderly ends today in my courtroom." But Judge Judy wasn't finished. She turned toward Mrs. Chen, whose tears of relief now flowed freely as months of fear and anxiety melted away. "Mrs. Chen," Judge Judy said, her tone softening for the first time, "I am awarding you $2,500 for court costs, emotional distress, and the harassment you've endured from this predator. Ms. Patterson will pay you, and she will pay you within 30 days, or she will face additional legal consequences." Linda's legs seemed to buckle beneath her. She clutched the podium for support, her face drained of color until it turned a sickly gray. But the worst was still to come. "Ms. Patterson," Judge Judy continued, her voice now cold and surgical, "I am referring your case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of multiple counts of fraud, perjury, and filing false police reports. The documents you presented as evidence in my courtroom are fabricated, which means you've committed perjury, a criminal offense. This is no longer just a civil matter." The courtroom erupted into spontaneous applause, the kind of raw, unscripted reaction that comes only from witnessing true justice. Linda's composure disintegrated completely. Her voice rose into a desperate, broken wail that echoed across the courtroom. "Your Honor, please, you can't do this to me. I have children. I have a family. I can't face criminal charges. Please, I'm begging you." This plea for mercy stood in stark contrast to the confident, condescending woman who had strutted into the courtroom just 20 minutes earlier. Judge Judy's response was ice-cold and utterly merciless. "You should have thought about your children before you decided to make a career out of defrauding elderly people, Miss Patterson. You should have considered your family before you fabricated evidence and lied under oath in a court of law. Your actions have consequences, and those consequences start today. Sarah Martinez had a family too. Mrs. Chen has children who watch their mother suffer under your harassment. You showed them no mercy, and you will receive none from me." The bailiff moved forward as Judge Judy continued. "Furthermore, I am ordering the transcripts of this case be sent to the prosecutors handling your 4 previous settlements. Those cases need to be reopened and investigated. If your pattern of behavior holds, those settlements were obtained through fraud as well, and your previous victims deserve restitution." Linda was openly sobbing now. Her designer dress was wrinkled, and her makeup streaked down her face in dark lines. The leather portfolio that had contained her fake evidence lay scattered on the floor where it had fallen from her shaking hands. Security was already moving toward her, ready to escort her from the courtroom as Judge Judy delivered her final words. "Ms. Patterson, you came into my courtroom thinking you were smarter than everyone else. You thought your preparation and fake evidence would overwhelm an elderly immigrant woman who couldn't afford a lawyer. But you forgot one crucial thing: truth always has a way of revealing itself when the right questions are asked." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to seal Linda Patterson's fate permanently. "Court is adjourned. Mrs. Chen, you are free to go, with my sincere apologies that you had to endure this harassment. Ms. Patterson, you will be hearing from the district attorney's office very soon." The courtroom remained in stunned silence for a moment before erupting again in applause, this time louder and more sustained. Mrs. Chen was surrounded by well-wishers from the audience, people patting her shoulder and praising her bravery. Linda was escorted out by security, her sobs echoing down the hallway even after she vanished from view. The court stenographer, who had been recording every word, later told colleagues that in 20 years of courtroom work, she had never seen such a complete and total destruction of a plaintiff's case in such a short time. Within 3 hours of the episode airing, the clip had been viewed over 2 million times on social media. By the end of the day, it had reached 15 million views and was trending on every major platform. The hashtag #TheDogger1 question went viral as people shared their own stories of standing up to scammers and bullies. Legal experts praised Judge Judy's methodical approach to exposing fraud, noting that her preparation and research had turned what could have been a he said, she said dispute into an ironclad exposure of criminal behavior. Local news stations in Linda's hometown picked up the story, airing segments titled "Serial Scammer Exposed on National Television" and "Judge Judy Takes Down Neighborhood Predator." Linda's face became instantly recognizable in her community, making it impossible for her to continue her pattern of targeting vulnerable neighbors. The district attorney's office moved quickly on Judge Judy's referral. Within 2 weeks, Linda Patterson was formally charged with 5 counts of fraud, 3 counts of perjury, and 2 counts of elder abuse. Prosecutors reached out to her 4 previous victims, all of whom came forward with strikingly similar stories of harassment, fabricated claims, and coerced settlements. What Linda thought would be an easy $5,000 payday turned into criminal charges that could result in years in prison and mandatory restitution to all her victims. Mrs. Chen became a local hero, interviewed by news outlets and praised for her courage in standing up to a predator, despite her fear and limited resources. She used part of her $2,500 award to finally fix her fence properly, and her neighbors organized a community fundraiser that raised enough money to help her with other long-delayed home repairs. The case became a landmark moment in courtroom television history, studied by legal professionals and communication scholars as a perfect example of how careful investigation and one perfectly timed question can expose even the most carefully constructed lies. Judge Judy's methodical destruction of Linda's fabricated story reminded millions of viewers that justice still exists for those brave enough to stand up for truth, even when facing someone with more resources and confidence. The moral was crystal clear. No amount of fake evidence, rehearsed testimony, or calculated targeting of vulnerable people can withstand the scrutiny of someone who knows exactly what questions to ask and refuses to be fooled by appearances. If this story of justice served and predators exposed moved you, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss another moment of Judge Judy delivering the accountability scammers so richly deserve. Smash that like button if you believe one perfect question is worth more than 1,000 lies. Comment below what you would have asked Linda if you were in Judge Judy's chair. And share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that truth always wins when it faces real experience and preparation. Remember, in Judge Judy's courtroom and in life, you can rehearse your lies all you want. But you can't prepare for someone who's seen every scam before and knows exactly how to expose it. The next time you think about cutting corners or manipulating the system, remember Linda Patterson and what happened when she faced someone who asked the one question she never prepared for. Justice is real. Accountability is inevitable. And Judge Judy proved once again why she remains the greatest courtroom legend in television history.